the audience of Fox generally has huge overlap with Tucker's audience. He was the biggest star on...
I've heard from more than one person this week. Classical liberals who had subscriptions to Fox who are cutting them now. Because and not to punish Fox, although that is a collateral benefit, but because that's why they were there.
Yep, that's why they were there. And I know a tremendous number of people, I wouldn't even just say classical liberals, lots and lots of people pay attention to Tucker because, in fact, he says a lot of stuff, including my personal take on it, is that he is frustrated at liberals who are failing to make the case for their values. And although he is a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, he understands that you don't want conservatism to win, that you want conservatism to play its role. You need liberalism to play its role, and that tension requires both parties to do their job, and liberals are falling down on that job in favor of other nonsense. And so he has been effectively making the case for liberalism, even though it's not his home turf, which I think is fascinating. But it does mean that there are a lot of people...
It reveals a kind of honor.
It does, which is another paradox. So paradox one, why would something that is apparently a for-profit business like Fox fire its biggest star with the largest audience and enrage his audience, which has a huge overlap with the rest of their audience?
And the largest audience with maybe the only audience at Fox that has crossover appeal.
Yeah, right. Or major crossover appeal. Yeah. The second paradox has to do with, have you ever run across the claim that Tucker Carlson is, for example, a white supremacist?
Sure.
Yeah. You ever click through on the evidence that finally reveals he's finally said the quiet part out loud?
I've never bothered.
Yeah, you should.
Much as, I mean, I did occasionally early after Evergreen see what the evidence that you were, but I stopped doing that too because it's pointless.
Well, I have made a point of doing it, always with some trepidation. Well, I will say not any longer because I've recognized the pattern, which is there's never any there.
But at first, like, oh God, what did I miss?
Right.
Who is this person?
Right. So you look at the tweet, it swears that he's finally revealed himself to be the white supremacist that he is, and then you click through and it turns out that he doesn't believe that our borders should be open. Right. Hardly a white supremacist position. So anyway...
Doesn't think some educational policies are actually good for black people.
Right. Not his bag.
Same thing.
So
that was the evidence of your white supremacy.
Right. My white supremacy, for which nobody in 6 years of there being a bounty on my head has found any evidence of it, of course. So it's the same old.
Yep.
But here's the paradox. Mm-hmm. And I will say, and I don't, this is unpleasant to recount because I now value Tucker and know him and like him. I did not always like him, as you know. In fact, I had a visceral distaste for the man that is not common for me. I don't typically find people abhorrent, and there was something very troubling about him to me in the CNN Crossfire days. Mm-hmm. And so I have been stuck with a question since first interacting with him when he, in the week that Evergreen melted down, invited me to come on his program. And as you'll recall, but I will recount for the audience, I was reluctant to go on his show. I knew very little about what he had been up to in modern times. I couldn't be certain that it wasn't a trap. He and I were from opposite sides of the political spectrum. His team was incredibly gracious when they reached out. And I decided, okay, he seems to want to know the story. Maybe that makes sense because the story of Evergreen's meltdown reflects poorly on liberalism.
So I remember, this is one of the conversations from that era that I actually remember explicitly and visually. Like I know where we had it. Mm-hmm. I know what room in our house in Olympia we had it in and how difficult it was because let's see, Evergreen melts down at 9:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, May 23rd, 2017, and I believe it's a Friday, and things have gotten crazier and worse, and everything is happening, and not a single major media outlet has reached out, and we've gone to the State House and we've tried to get the governor to bring order to the campus, and there's just no help coming. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And his people call, and you've talked to them, and you say, I think I need to go on Fox, and not just Fox, but Tucker. And both of us are like, oh God, no, like why? Why does it have to be? Why isn't the New York Times calling? Why isn't CNN calling? Why isn't NPR calling? Why aren't all of the supposedly left-leaning bastions of journalism calling at this incredibly anti-liberal, anti-democratic insurrection at a public college? Well, they weren't, and they never did. And Tucker's people did. And you went on.
I went on, and it was kind of a strange thing. They sent a vehicle. It's a long drive up to Seattle from Olympia, and we got stuck in traffic. So I was literally like threading the microphone through my shirt in the elevator. They sat me down in the chair. My hair is crazy. I'm shiny because nobody had any time to do makeup because anyway. So, and, I couldn't see Tucker because the way the studio is set up, you're just looking at a pair of eyeballs that have been drawn on a piece of paper above a camera. Anyways, very strange experience.
And he's on the other coast. He's not in the same building with you.
But anyway, the experience was one, so here's somebody I don't like who I think is probably using me to make the case against liberalism. And I'm there because the story needs to break into a larger audience. They are going to effectively snuff us out on the campus, and this mutiny is going to take hold of the place if I can't get the word out and nobody else is calling. So I go there because they've offered, and there's no other place that will have me, and I'm expecting him to be using me, and that's not what I got. What I got was a compassionate guy who actually, in spite of the fact that I'm some liberal professor from a radical college, and this person is supposed to be my arch political enemy, I got nothing but decency from him. And he was not, telling me, you see, we conservatives were right? So anyway, the second paradox with Tucker is that many of us formulated an opinion of him, and then in recent times, you'll find a whole host of liberals find safe harbor on Tucker's program. From Glenn Greenwald, who has long been participating across a political divide with Tucker, Matt Taibbi, Tulsi Gabbard, the list goes on and on.
I just add a little more color to your appearance there,
Sure.
and how then we live downstream of that while still being in the crazy part of Evergreen story, which was that within a day or two, one of the faculty at Evergreen declared in an email to all the faculty and staff, when Brett went on Tucker, the world shifted to the right. And I looked at that and I thought about, launching more things. And I did not publicly respond, but I said, but at the same time, I was then monitoring your email because you were getting hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 emails a day at that point because it was public. It was your Evergreen email. And it was mostly from your appearance on Tucker Carlson. And I've spoken about this and we've written about this before, but the thing that I saw in the people who said, I saw you on Tucker and was amazing. And they would always begin with, well, I'm on the right, you and I disagree politically, or I'm on the left, but I listen to Tucker because, or I'm in the middle of the country, or I'm in Tunisia, or I'm old, I'm young, I'm white, I'm black, I'm female, I'm male, like every demographic marker you could possibly expect, highly educated, self-declared not educated at all of the possible demographics. And yes, this is a selected group of people who chose to write to you after seeing you on Tucker Carlson, but they said, thank you, sir. You and I surely disagree about many things. Maybe we don't, maybe we do. But I know that if I were to meet you, I could have a conversation with you, and that is what is missing in American discourse now. And as a result of those, which continue to come in for weeks, and still occasionally, but in just like droves and droves and droves for weeks, I thought in response to that confused, ideologically captured faculty member at Evergreen who had said, when Brett went on Tucker, the world shifted to the right, I thought, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. When you went on Tucker, that opened up the world more to the left, and in the good way, not the thing that is currently masquerading as the left, but in service of conversation. And frankly, that is what you learned, and therefore I learned, Tucker Carlson was accomplishing with having all of these different guests on.
Right. Which then points to the paradox.
Yes.
And I've been wondering about this since the day that I went on his program the first time. And I think I've been on Tucker Carlson Tonight 4 times, and I went on Tucker Carlson Today once. So I've had a number of interactions with him. Unfortunately, the gig on Fox is always a few minutes. It's the hardest interview to do because there's just no time to say anything substantial. But his hour-long Tucker Carlson Today thing is quite a different environment, and it offered the possibility for us to interact without the camera on.
You were actually there in the studio with him.
Actually physically present. And, I know we're not in the same place on a lot of issues, but I did find a genuinely decent person. We shared lots of interests. He's a kind of a hands-on, do-it-yourself kind of guy. So anyway, the paradox is, how do we reconcile the person who, has partnered with Glenn Greenwald over the span of many years, who reached out to me with compassion at a moment that he might have taken a victory lap for conservatism. How do we reconcile that person with the person that we thought was so awful, right? And what I've come to realize is that actually a lot of the sense about Tucker is a holdover from that prior era, whatever its meaning was, the crossfire era, the bow tie era. And I think the thing is, people assume, in fact, you will hear lots of people say, oh, people don't change. People don't change, right? And of course, what they really mean is that change is very difficult, and therefore, if you think somebody has changed radically, you're more likely wrong than right. But I think the evidence that Tucker has changed is actually readily apparent, and especially in the aftermath of his de facto firing, I've gone and looked at a number of things. His most recent talk at the Heritage Foundation, utterly fascinating. Absolutely recommend it. And some smaller podcast talks that he's done. And he talks about, rather like Glenn Beck, he talks about the fact that he regrets his early behavior in his career, that he feels remorse about it, that he thought he was playing a destructive role, right? Now that sounds like a person who has grown. And I think part of what I'm wondering is if the rap on Tucker Carlson isn't largely based on the fact that people have not checked in on not only how he's grown as a person, but also how he has developed his political understanding, right? That his balanced sense that, if nobody's providing safe harbor for real liberals, that somebody has to do it because conservatism actually depends on real liberals doing their job or it's not going to work, right? That is a very different story, but you never get there because the political modality of the day basically paints somebody with a label and then persecutes you if you don't trust the label and go check for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So, the rap on me, of course, was nonsense, but what it did successfully was prevented lots of people from checking for themselves. Does this sound like a white supremacist, right? Does this sound like a eugenicist or any of the other
Don't touch that. Might be
right.
Contagious.
Right. So anyway, that is going to become an important piece of this story, which is that there is a technique that is being used to keep people from checking in with dangerous properties like Tucker Carlson, and the technique involves a stigma for which there is a penalty for checking for yourself. And if people did check for themselves, and many have, right? They go watch Tucker Carlson today, they see these monologues, and they realize, oh, actually, he's alerting me to something I'm not seeing on other media that's important, and our values aren't so far apart, right? That's what you find if you actually go and check for yourself. But what fraction of the audience just doesn't, because they can't? And so anyway, the second paradox is, did he change, or did we have him wrong? Or do we have him wrong now, right? Those of us who have changed our position on who he is. And I firmly come out in the belief that he has changed in a way that his reputation has not caught up to. And I did once ask him about this. And the answer was surprising to me, right? I said, you're just not a good match for what I see written about you. And he sort of had a general sense of what's said about him, but he was not in any deep way paying attention to the daily back and forth and the scuttlebutt this week on, right. So, anyway, that's probably very healthy, very like Joe Rogan, who says, don't read the comments. Okay. So you've got a corporation.
If you know who you are, and you know what you're doing, and you have some number of close advisors who you are assured will tell you if you appear to be changing or off, or that was an error, or whatever needs to be said to you, why would you drag yourself through the other stuff?
Yeah. Why would you do it? And I think ultimately in the model we're going to find here, there's a question of manipulation, right? The audience is clearly manipulated. We've talked about them being manipulated into not watching for themselves and formulating their own opinion. But the personalities are also manipulated too. And if you are tuned in, then the point is that is a conduit through which whatever is operating can access you and modify what you do in a way that is useful to it and not to you and not to your audience. So there is definitely a strong piece of that flavor. Now, what I want to do is basically throw a number of principles in together and see if they don't resolve the ultimate paradox that we're discussing, which is why would Fox News burn such an important property? And I do just want to. Fox recently settled a major lawsuit over allegations that voting machines were insecure. And I find the idea that they fired Tucker over this preposterous, given his importance to their business. I also would point out that they settled. They didn't lose a lawsuit. So, yeah, it's a large number, but they chose not to fight it. And this wasn't primarily a Tucker thing anyway. So none of that makes sense. It kind of suffices. If you're just looking for some explanation, you can resort to that, but it's not the right order of magnitude. And, so Fox appears to have cut off its nose. Yes.
I was really trying to change something else.
For those of you just listening, Heather has suffered a furniture malfunction.
Oh my God.
All right.
Yes, someone had come in. I'm sorry, just go on.
Look,
it doesn't
here's
matter.
the thing.
It doesn't matter.
A furniture malfunction, you can live that down, right? It's not a wardrobe malfunction.
You don't know.
I think I do. I do know pretty well. Okay, so a couple things. I'm just going to put them on the table, and then we'll try to piece them together.
Yeah.
I have argued for using the term Goliath to refer to a force in the universe that one can detect. What is Goliath? Goliath is the force that opposes meaningful change. Now, I say that because, first of all, change is all around us. There's obviously no force preventing change. But those who have achieved disproportionate power, rent-seeking elites who have disproportionate control, disproportionate security in the future, tend to use that power to prevent radical shifts, because radical shifts can only take them in the downward direction. They're very unlikely. If you're at the top, you can't go up. So this force is troubled by anything that threatens to introduce some kind of change, any event horizon beyond which the future is unpredictable. Goliath opposes that. So the prime directive for Goliath is no meaningful change. And basically, meaningful change refers to the basic flow of well-being, power, and wealth, right? Is Goliath a conspiracy? No. Goliath is a hybrid between colluding entities, including, things like corporations and political parties, departments of state, things like that, and emergent properties, right? The social phenomena that emerge in the social environment that buttress the current power structure, etc. So, that is what I'm going to argue is underlying a strange move like this, a business operating in a way that is not businesslike, that does not appear oriented towards maximizing shareholder value over the future.